Welcome back to Crosswalk.com's Inside the Editor's Room podcast, where we give you a look at how our editors discuss the trends and issues of the day from a Christian perspective. I'm Stephen McGarvey, the editor-in-chief here for Crosswalk.com and the editorial director for Salem Web Network. This week, we're going to talk about Grace and Graciousness with an interview with Pastor Kyle Idleman and his new book, Grace is Greater, and also spend some time continuing what we started in our mini episode last week, talking about stuff Christians should stop saying. But before we get into that, let's quickly go around the room and introduce ourselves.
I'm Rachel Dawson, the design editor.
Hi, I'm Kelly Givens. I'm the editor of iBelieve.com and the senior editor here at Salem Web.
And I'm Sean McAvoy, the managing editor of Crosswalk.com. And I just wanted to ask you guys real quick before we really get into Kyle Idleman. My new favorite Christian person in this space is someone we had in a little video clip on Crosswalk this week, Ernie Johnson from TNT. I don't know if you're familiar with his basketball coverage, but Ernie, he was doing a little book tour for his new book, Unscripted, and he stopped off last week at all the spots on ESPN. I happened to catch a couple of them, and our wonderful videographer, Steven Sanders, was able to pull one of those video interviews over to our site, and you can find that if you go to the video section on Crosswalk. I think you'll really be blessed with what Ernie has to say, and I've started reading his book, and I never do this. I never read autobiographies, but it's some really good stuff, really humble guy.
Huh. Did he ever play, or was he just a sportscaster?
No, Ernie's always been a sportscaster. His dad was when the Atlanta Braves first came to cable TV with TBS, his dad was one of the broadcasters for those games. So it was in his blood. But now he hangs around with Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal and has a blast on that show with those guys. But he has spoken of his faith on the air several times, and it's really interesting he would be allowed to do that. But he does it in such a way that it is completely non-offensive, but also completely gets the message across and in a humble and redeeming way. So check that out if you have time.
Sweet. Sports.
Yeah. Sports that I think you can even enjoy, Stephen.
Even
McGarvey.
I can enjoy, yeah. I'm not as famously into sports as you are, Sean, but I can appreciate a good Christian testimony
Absolutely.
on ESPN. So,
I do
great.
feel like sports is maybe one of the only areas left in culture where your faith can still kind of play a part. I just feel like if anyone is vocal about their faith, it's athletes, and that's a whole other discussion we
Tim
can get
Tebow
into.
has 2 home runs already.
I know.
No way, really?
Yeah, for a minor league team, yeah.
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 Good times.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations to Tim Tebow.
All right, so Kyle Idleman. I actually interviewed Kyle a few weeks ago for Crosswalk about this book, Grace is Greater. And let's just listen to a few things that Kyle had to say about a kind of a fresh take on what grace is. Grace is not an uncommon book topic or discussion topic these days. So what did you notice was missing or not quite right in the way we've been teaching or thinking about grace?
I've read before that the challenge for any communicator is not just to make new things familiar, but to make familiar things new. And I increasingly became convicted that the way to do that is to talk about grace more experientially. So, and the Gospels do this for us as well. Paul teaches a lot about grace, but Jesus, while he didn't use the word grace, we learn a ton about grace because of just the stories. And so whether that's a parable that he tells like the prodigal son, or whether that's Jesus meeting the woman at the well in John 4, we learn a lot about grace even if that word doesn't get used. And so I really wanted to help us in writing this book, to help us see grace in these stories so that we could kind of uncover it or discover it within our own.
That's great. And when I was reading the book, that's one of the things that really intrigued me was, Jesus didn't use that word, but as with a lot of things, he sure modeled it. That was a cool point. You've kind of structured this book around the idea that grace it's greater than our sin. It's more than that. You go on to talk about in some of your chapters that grace is greater than some of the most powerful, difficult concepts we have: guilt, bitterness, vengeance, despair. People live in bondage to these things. So how does grace beat them? How does grace win?
A way to think of it would be that most of us have some wounds that are pretty deep, that have been afflicted by other people. We've been hurt in some way, some significant way. And typically when we are hurt in a significant way, we let those wounds kind of heal on their own, and they end up getting infected, and we carry them around for a long time, and it's scar tissue, and but grace, I believe, has the power to kind of clean that out. It's hard because it hurts at first. You have to uncover some things that maybe you buried a long time ago, but grace has the power to kind of clean that out and allow you to deal with it on not just a symptomatic level, but in the deeper way. And the way that I think this connection works is, as we live in God's grace, as we understand, who He is and what He's done for us, it gives us something to give. We have within our hearts this grace we've received, and so now we're able to extend to others. One of the ways I know I'm not really walking in the light of God's grace the way that I should be, or as intentionally as I should be, is I start getting short with people around me. I'm just kind of in a bad mood or angry, and I don't really have a reason why. I have this lack of grace towards others. And I know that when I am receiving, when I am appreciating the grace God has given me, it just, it treats all those other relationships. I'm much more gracious. I'm much more fun to live with. I am much more understanding. I'm not nearly as offended. I don't get offended very easily. And so I just see how receiving it from God has a way of kind of addressing all these other areas where grace is needed.
So I think that the thing that stuck out to me most from that interview, and kind of my own takeaway, was, okay, if I say I'm a Christian and grace has changed my life, then what is the evidence of that? What's the overflow? And where he talked about, we can kind of be, if we are filled with grace, then we're going to be overflowing that grace toward other people. And so we're kinder and we're gentler, and we have the fruit of the Spirit in us. And so therefore it's bearing fruit, and there's evidence of that toward how we live for other people. And I think that in general, I can love people and have a heart for people in the abstract, but then when it comes to actually specifically loving the people that are right in front of my face on a daily basis, that's actually a lot harder for me to do. That requires actual giving grace in that moment toward people who might be frustrating me or annoying me or bothering me. And I was convicted of that just recently, and the interview with Kyle kind of nailed that in for me again, of just, it's great to love people in the abstract. It's great to be brokenhearted for things going on in the world that are kind of away from us. But I think God does call us to be loving people who are specifically in our lives, that He's planted right in front of us. And that's the part that I think I need to work on.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting for me. It often caring about the world around me outside of my personal influence and the people who come into my life are it can be an excuse not to care about the person down the hall. And that's hard. You have to re-examine yourself, and those things that go on out in the world that we all just get jazzed about, like what's going on in Syria right now, for example, or the school shooting that happened yesterday. Yes, it is right that we care, but we can't let that stop us from actually caring about the people that God puts in my life today. So it's a great reminder.
This is why Kyle wrote this book, you guys. He one of the things he talks about in the introduction that we also talked about in another part of our interview was that his last book, Not a Fan, did really well. It's about how it's more of a how Christians should live radically type of book, and not just be fans of Jesus, but followers. And after he gave a speech on that one a few years ago, someone handed him just a slip of paper afterwards, and on it was simply written the verse Hebrews 12:15. See to it that no one misses the grace of God. And this is talking about this micro level that we're all talking about. Let no bitter root grow up to cause trouble and defile many. And an interesting quote he puts in that same chapter of the book where he discusses that is that religion without grace is poisonous. And if we're going through day-to-day religious stuff and forgetting these things, and we're not seeing to it that nobody misses this grace, then that's a problem. We can preach radicalism and overarching grace as much as we want, but we have to remember that we have a role in it as well. But that we can let it fill and heal almost any area of our lives. That's what I got out of this book, and why I actually read it cover to cover. It hit me at a point in my life where grace was becoming just that. It's a great thing, and it heals me and it saves me. It's the side to always err upon. But, it can do more than that for our lives. It's saving us all the time.
Yeah, what was convicting for me was thinking about, there's a line in his book that says, the grace you have received is greater than the grace you're being asked to give. And I think it's so easy to kind of get indignant or to feel resentment toward, people that have wronged us or hurt us or caused us grief, or even just towards circumstances and situations. If there's been a loss, or if there's been some kind of a challenging thing, to feel like it's too much to give grace in this scenario, or this is too hard to do, or it's too hard to forgive this person, or this wrong against me. But he goes on to talk about it's not so much minimizing the offense of what we have to forgive, and Jesus isn't doing that either, but it's more, he says, the more you understand of the holiness of God and the more you understand yourself, the more you realize how true this is. And that's just been really humbling for me to realize that I've been forgiven of so much, and I've been shown so much grace by Christ that in contrast, the grace I'm being asked to show to my neighbors or to my family members, or like you said, coworkers and the people right in front of me, it makes it seem not necessarily easier, but just puts it into perspective of how I should freely try to give that grace because I've been given so much.
One of the things I really appreciated about this book, we get so many books like this. The four of us and people who work here, we hear so many different pastors. It's just sort of, we're sort of under the waterfall of this kind of content. And what struck me when I read through the book was Kyle is very humble in that there's so much of his own personal struggle with this in the stories that he tells in books. And I often feel like with so much of this content coming from pastors, a lot of it feels like I'm the pastor on high preaching the message to you. And when you can tell a personal story and work that into the message that you're trying to get out there, I think that it's so much more winsome. It's so much more effective. And some of the stories that Kyle has are just great. You can almost see yourself in a lot of them. It's a small book, but it's very powerful, I think, largely because he doesn't take himself out of it. He talks about the times that he failed to show grace and what God taught him with that.
I think that's why my favorite chapter in the book, and I think you agreed, Kelly, this is one of the ones you read through as well, was how Kyle talks about grace being more powerful than our weakness. And I just wanted to close with a quote that I loved from there, that he says, you're never in a better position to experience God's grace than the moment you realize you don't have what it takes. And that applies to dealing with really anything in your life. Grace can apply to the macro level, as we've talked about, the micro level of seeing someone else, but also in your own life and your own struggles. And when you realize that you don't have what it takes to get over this hump or defeat this situation, that's where you have more grace than you know.
Okay, so if you guys listened to our mini episode that we did last week, we talked about one specific thing that some Christians, specifically pastors, say a lot with these smoking hot wives. We had a fun little discussion about that. So if you didn't hear that episode, go ahead and head back to that one and listen to it. It's just about 10 minutes talking about that one topic. But we wanted to dive into more of that today and talk about things that Christians should stop saying. And these are things that we're not trying to attack any Christians here, but really just these kind of sometimes cliche sayings or sometimes just kind of off-base things that Christians say too much and maybe we should say less of. So what are some of the ones that come to your mind, guys, when you kind of think about things Christians should stop saying?
God helps those who help themselves. That was one from growing up that I then found never in the Bible.
Yeah, that's Ben Franklin, I believe.
Yeah, is it? Yeah.
In fact, wasn't there? Do you remember that Bible trivia show that was on the Jeff Foxworthy one.
Yeah, the American Bible Challenge.
Yeah, is that what it's called?
Uh-huh.
They had a segment on that I thought was hilarious.
In the Bible, not in the Bible?
Yeah, well, is it from the Bible or is it from Ben Franklin?
Yes, that's right. Well, that's what it was.
It's amazing how many things like that are just in the American vernacular that have no real foundation in the Bible, and if you unpack them, they don't make a lot of theological sense.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have come to dislike the very well-meaning God will not give you more than you can handle. And we can argue that on both sides forever. What it all comes down to how you define handle. Are you still alive? Well, then you're handling it. But some people are like, but I'm not doing well, so I'm not handling it. Maybe that's just one we leave out and find a better way to say the sentiment that we're trying to encourage with.
Or that everything happens for a reason. It's that same kind of thought of like, okay, but does it? And what's the reason? And I think we use that to justify. That
typically comes out when you're in like some devastating problem or pain in your life and people don't know what to say because, sometimes you just can't relate to somebody going through something that you've not been through. And it's sort of like that catch-all, cliched, like, I don't know what else to say and I want to be nice, so I just sort of fall back on that phrase.
And that's why there's as many different categories of these things we should watch. Our friend and contemporary Debbie Holloway is fond of reminding us, words mean things, you guys. And we've got articles about what not to say to the grieving and what not to say in a theological article or an encouraging piece. There's all these different things. I tend to give a little bit more grace to the well-meaning things because the things that I really feel Christians shouldn't say. I was raised hearing things like the 4/4 beat is evil and we can't have it in Christian music, or that nice lady passed away before her promised 70 years because she was too proud and didn't have enough faith. These are the things Christians shouldn't say, in my opinion. These other things are all just fun to argue and talk about and window dressing.
We have an entire article on things that Christians should stop saying on Facebook specifically, and I think that it's kind of a fun conversation to have. I think I don't go a day without looking at Facebook and kind of like, cringing a little bit over some of the things people post very well-meaning, but I think we're just so hungry for attention and to be known that we sometimes overshare. And I think that one of the things that this article mentions is kind of vague booking and how we say like, oh, just please pray for this person, but I can't give you any details. Just like if you can't or shouldn't, then don't post it.
Yeah.
I think we need to be so mindful of that kind of thing when we're on Facebook or whatever social media platform we're on, and just check our motives. What's the point of this? Is it to bring attention to the fact that you know something that other people don't know?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then just don't say it.
It's the new prayer time, which was gossip time in our youth group.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's back in those days, the old youth group days, and when I was younger, that was the unspoken request would just drive people nuts. Like, well, okay.
What could it be?
What could it be? And it launches everybody into speculation over what could it be. And it's I think Facebook makes it. Now we call it vague booking, but it's Facebook has turned up the gas on that, and now it's just a big I know something you don't know, and it's awkward. People should quit doing that.
Another thing on Facebook that's in that article as well is the whole like, if you don't support such and such a cause or a candidate, then just unfriend me now. And I know this has been a particularly contentious political season where there's been kind of a lot of that, of like, if you're not on my side of the spectrum, then I don't even want to have a relationship with you. And it's, to me, like, for us as Christians, we should be able to kind of put those things aside and know that there are more important things to us than politics. And we should be able to love our neighbor and love our friends, love our family members, and even the crazy relatives on Facebook, and not just jump to that dramatic unfriend if you don't support the same thing as me in the same way. I think that's a little silly.
Well, it is. But to the counterpoint of that, it is basically saying there's nothing more important to me than politics or my views on this. So if you really mean that, I guess go ahead and say it.
Sure. I know. I struggle with wondering, I don't know what you guys think about this, if as Christians we should even be engaging about politics in the social sphere. And I go back and forth with it. I mean, on the one hand, Facebook is really where people find their news now. It's where they go. It's kind of the front page for them of finding out information about things. So you can't really cut that off completely from people. But then on the other hand, I think you ruin any chance of having like a personal face-to-face conversation with someone if you know every single view they have about any topic before you even get in the room with them. Well, then you're like, what's even the point of having a conversation with you? I know everything you feel about this, and I don't necessarily feel the same way. So maybe I just avoid this, and any fruitful conversation about those topics are kind of shut down before they even begin. So I don't know. I go back and forth with whether there's even merit or fruit to be had for having those conversations, but some people
obviously,
want to.
I mean, why do you guys think every time we run an article on stuff you shouldn't say or stuff you shouldn't say on Facebook or stuff you shouldn't say to the grieving, it does very well. It obviously touches a nerve. And there's a lot more of these things out there. And audience, feel free to leave some in the comments that we're leaving out here. But why do you guys think that is?
I think people want to know if they see themselves in the list. I think it's, I think for a lot of people, it's have I been saying things that are irritating other people? You sort of immediately personify it to yourself. And then, there's the group of people who are like, yeah, I know so-and-so says that. And it's sort of you catalog your personal experience through things like that. And it does do extremely well. I think because we all, Facebook is very personal to so many people when this stuff goes out on Facebook. I would say, Kelly, it's an interesting quandary there about politics on Facebook and how we talk about these things. I would say we should be talking about this stuff, in the public square. And if Facebook is the public square, then so be it. We shouldn't take it so personally and take it to heart, when we do that, when we should remember the importance of it. It's important, but it's not as important as a lot of things that we could be talking about and a lot of ways we minister to people. So, there are more important things than whether or not you voted for Donald Trump, or Hillary Clinton in the past election to be that upset about, and I think if the problem that we have is that everybody gets whipped into a frenzy and we don't recognize that.
Bring it back to Kyle's grace subject.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you said about seeing ourselves in the lists, because as I was going through these this morning, I found myself in one of them. One of our authors was saying Christians should stop saying Christianity is a relationship, not a religion. And I was like, no, I will not stop saying that. I recognize that it is one of the world's recognized religions, but it is also not, and it is unique in several ways. And I hold to this. So, these articles are, again, I think there's much worse things Christians can say theologically and, politically and that are hurtful than the well-meaning things. The well-meaning things are, stuff I feel like we can debate about or talk in silly ways about, as we did with the smoking hot wife issue.
Some of them are kind of like tics. It's sort of like depending on who you've been around, who you grow up with, you notice that people pray certain ways. They say things in Christian circles like, if the Lord tarries. I remember going through a time in my life where
hedge of protection.
Hedge of protection. If the Lord tarries, it's like, we're going to go to lunch today with the pastor. If the Lord tarries, it's like, you can't say I'm doing anything, and you can't with any sort of future intention without putting that caveat in there.
Right, and there is a Bible verse about that.
Unless Jesus comes back, we're going to lunch with the pastor today, or we're going to go to the movies. And it's just I think we can thank Hal Lindsey and Tim LaHaye for things like that. But there are a lot of like verbal tics that Christians have that are unique to our space, that I think sometimes it's fun to take a step back and go, well, why do I say that? Like, God knows my heart that I'm not going to go to lunch if Jesus comes back today, and that kind of thing. Or maybe we will go to lunch when Jesus comes back. We'll all just go to lunch with Jesus. So
traveling mercies. I just don't want my tire to pop on I-95.
Traveling mercies. The things we say in prayer when we're in a group of people that just sort of like perpetuate themselves, and you just sort of fill in the blanks, the ums and the uhs with these sorts of things.
Father just.
The covet your prayers always threw me. I didn't really grow up like a Christian, and so in college I heard that for the first time, and I was like, I thought we shouldn't covet. I was very thrown off. But I do think that we do have Christianese that we have to be careful. If there
That's
are
a whole
people,
other topic.
Oh, yeah. People that are not as indoctrinated into the Christian world. These words can be very off-putting or weird or isolating. Just even the way we pray and the way we talk about our faith can confuse non-believers. So I think, like you said, words mean something. Let's be very clear about what we're talking about and try to find, universally understood words for things that maybe Christians know our vernacular. And I even find this in some of the articles that we write. As I'm editing, like, oh, I know what you mean. Would someone who isn't as well versed in the Bible know what you mean? So trying to help people just be as universally welcoming and understanding as possible is a good thing to keep in mind as we speak.
Yeah, I think it's a matter really of just thoughtfulness and intentionality with what we're saying. And there are oftentimes I think we do use these phrases in the situations where we don't know what to say or it's a hard circumstance and we just kind of put some God will never give you more than you can handle because I don't know what to say in that. But I think back to what you said, Kelly, if we don't know what to say, but we can point people back to Scripture or just give people a place to go. And I think a lot of these phrases, my issue with them is that they kind of just don't give you anywhere to go with that. And it just kind of feels like I'm going to give you this nice phrase that's just kind of like and I'm going to walk away now. Like I'm going to close the door and here, I'll give you this line and that's the end of what I have to say about that. But I think a better option is just to kind of open a door for a conversation, whether that's on Facebook. If we want to share an article, are we saying it in a way that we're encouraging dialogue that's not an attack on anyone who believes differently or thinks differently about a cause or a candidate or whoever, but are we just creating these places where we can really actually have conversations that are fruitful and that are glorifying to the Lord and not just shutting people out or giving people lines that really don't help foster relationship or build the kingdom at all. So I think just being thoughtful about what we're saying and making sure that we are just reflecting who Christ is and not just giving people these blanket statements is what we should be doing.
All right, so this is the portion of our podcast where we have a little fun and we talk to you guys about what we are loving or listening to or reading this week, and we call it our Check This Out segment. So Sean, why don't you tell us what you want us to check out this week?
Last week I kind of had a little bit of the downer segment, and this week my topic is another one, depression. But what made me happy this week about it was...
You're bumming me out, Sean.
I know, right? Immediately. No, I found an article on the site A Coffee with Friends, which is a blog by a joint husband and wife who are missionaries overseas. I got the impression this was written from the wife's perspective, but it was titled 46 Ways Depression Made Me a Better Person. And it leads off with a quote I just loved: hurt people, healed people, heal people. And I was like, hey, I about 10 years ago, I had a very nasty bout with depression, and I should write a similar article, and that's what made me happy about this. I was like, because as I read through it, I only had about maybe 5 or 6 similar takeaways in common from my own battle with what she wrote. Pain creates greater empathy for a greater number of people. My spouse will love me in the good and the bad. I am no longer naive. These were some ways depression also made me a better person. But realizing that I could write my own list, looking back on this now, and seeing some ways I truly have been made better from going through this battle, was an exciting and inspiring thing. And so now this week I hope to sit down and put some of those to the paper.
That's great. How about you, Steve?
Well, I do a lot of reading, and this Check This Out segment is not about reading. I've last week.
Clever intro.
Last week I found something on Netflix I liked, and I read a lot, and I was like, I've got to bring a book so people know that I actually do read. And I did. And then I thought I can actually interview that author. So I'm going to save that for a later segment and talk about something that really made me happy this week was the trailer for Thor Ragnarok. Now, a lot of people will know that Sean and I have been doing movie reviews on crosswalk.com for a long time, for 3 or 4 years.
Thor films have never been your favorites.
We are. I'll get to that. We are. It's one of the things that we both love movies. We love doing it, even though it doesn't get a lot of traffic or attention. It's just
not
sort
mission
of
critical to Crosswalk.
It's not. It's kind of a labor of love. And so we were talking at the end of our last time we did with Facebook Live movie review. We were talking about what we're looking forward to, and it sort of sent me down this road of, there's really nothing I'm looking forward to this year. It's just all the same.
Aside from Guardians of the Galaxy.
Drab. And there's not a lot of things that I look out and go, Guardians of the Galaxy looks good. But, there's just so many of the things that are supposed to like get movie people amped up this year are just kind of like, what is that? Why are they doing that? That doesn't connect with me at all. And then I saw the trailer yesterday for Thor Ragnarok. So, you're correct in that I'm not a huge fan of that character or those films, and yet they seem to have taken an entirely new spin on it. It's
new director, right?
It's a new director. It looks funny. It looks interesting. It totally came out of left field. I didn't expect it. So if you're into movies and you've probably already seen it, but for my check this out, that trailer certainly made me happy.
The trailer will give you a chuckle at the end.
It is funny and clever in a way that a good movie trailer should be, and it made me go, I wasn't even thinking I would like that movie a little bit. I would just suffer through it because I have to. It looked a lot. It's just a lot of fun. It's just a silly fun thing that was like on my mind yesterday. So for movie fans out there, Thor Ragnarok, the trailer. Now the movie will probably be nowhere near as fun or interesting as those 3 minutes, but there you go.
Wonderful. Rachel, how about you?
Yeah, so my check this out is actually a goal-setting tool that I've been loving this year called Power Sheets, and they come from Lara Casey's Cultivate What Matters shop. And I started them in January, and it's a really intentional kind of planner that's really focused on goals. And I actually found that so toward the end of March, there was kind of this section in the Power Sheets that I hadn't expected. It was this 3-month goal refresh. And it was really great to just look through some of the things that didn't work for me in the past 3 months of the year and what did work and some lessons that I learned before I set my April goals. And I know they just released their new 6-month Power Sheets for the second half of the year. So I found them to be a really helpful tool. It's something that I find myself telling friends about a lot. Is just a really great way of kind of living your life in an intentional way through your career or just your home life or different aspects of your faith. And this is a tool that I'm really loving right now.
Do you think people could jump into that without having started at the beginning of the year like you did?
Yeah, the ones that are meant for the 6 months are undated, so you can really start at any time. And they really just give you month by month different ways to kind of just take kind of inventory of where you're at in life and set goals and kind of think through different things. So I happened to start in January because it worked out that way, but you definitely could start at any time and just move through throughout the season from there.
That's great. So my thing to check out this week is another podcast. I assume if you're listening to this podcast, it's because you're a podcast fan and you might want another recommendation. And so I found this great one from Nancy Guthrie. She has a podcast called Help Me Teach the Bible. So I am working with my church this fall to teach a How to Study the Bible class. And so I've been doing a lot of research on this topic and stumbled on this podcast from Nancy and love it. Love that, number one, it's a woman who is hosting this podcast about teaching the Bible. I think that's just so great. But two, this is just such quality content. She is interviewing just some great pastors and people who have thought through this topic really thoughtfully and have some really good words of wisdom. So there are several podcast episodes that are just kind of overviews about teaching like with clarity and authority, but then there are also specific episodes about different chapters of the Bible. So if you're not even teaching a broad general class on how to study the Bible, but specifically you're studying Galatians with your Sunday school, you could read or you could listen to her episode on Galatians with such and such pastor and kind of get a great overview in a sense of, okay, how do I teach this in a concise, clear, complete way to my students? And so we'll have all of these in the show notes for you, but definitely check them all out. It's our fun episode where we get to just give you something to enjoy, and we hope that you enjoy them like we have.
And that brings us to the end of our show. We wanted to give special thanks to Kyle Idleman, who, by the way, is the teaching pastor at Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky, author of many books, and frequently speaks at conferences and churches across the country. You can find out more about Kyle and Grace is Greater at kyleidleman.com, and Grace is Greater is published by Baker Books. Thank you to Kelly and Steve and Rachel today, and to our audio engineers, Stephen Sanders and Kyle Fletcher. To find out more on the topics we talked about today, or to listen to our past episodes, please be sure to visit our InsideTheEditorsRoom.com site on Crosswalk, and you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, TuneIn, or SoundCloud to get our latest episodes downloaded right to your phone. Thanks for listening.